Namaste and welcome. I am so delighted to be with you again for another edition of Live, Love, Engage. And I've got a wonderful guest with us today, and she has a wealth of experience. Let's just say that regarding the issue of trauma. But first, I want to welcome Sarah Brassard to Live, Love, Engage.
Thank you, Gloria. Pleasure to be with you today.
Oh, well, I had been so looking forward to this discussion, and I'll tell all of our listeners and viewers why in a moment, but let me tell them all about you. So she is the author of Inside: A Guide to the Resources Within. She is also a 30 plus year spiritual teacher, trauma worker, and life coach. And Sarah runs an online community, mastermind group, and group coaching to help women heal and grow through hardships. And she also hosts the annual Trauma Recovery Summit, which is actually how we connected, because I am proud to be one of the speakers on the summit this year, which is coming up very soon. And we'll talk more about that in a little bit. But first, I love to always start and asking our guests to share a little bit about their story and really what got you interested in being specifically a trauma worker, and I guess and a coach, someone who helps people through trauma.
Yeah, I think I answer this differently every time I'm asked this question, um, because there's so many different facets to trauma and to what we experience, and understanding that we have actually been traumatized. For me, it was this propensity towards wanting to make everything on the outside of my life look pristine, polished up. I didn't want anyone to know about this tremendous abandonment that I had suffered as a young person. And what that was like for my life was that my mom left our family. Life was pretty put together prior to that. And she left when I was 13. And then shortly thereafter, my father passed away.
Mm.
And so, what becomes just your life? This is just my life. I'm a 13-year-old and I have brothers and sisters, and we're all coping in various ways. And I would say that I didn't even know what that word meant when I was young. I only knew that it was this way before and this way after. And subsequently, as I said, I tried my best to put everything together, but after years and years of living outside, as I like to say, because my book is called Inside: A Guide to the Resources Within, I realized that living outside of your life like that, it wears you down at all levels, at a physical, at an emotional, at a mental and spiritual level, and it's not sustainable.
Mm.
And so ultimately it was my body that broke down, and that was through bronchial pneumonia that had me in bed for weeks, and skin conditions that just used to just drive me crazy. And ultimately it was this innate understanding that there had to be something better than this, that really I wasn't going to be able to live the rest of my life with this level of suffering.
My goodness. Well, first, I'm sorry for the losses that you experienced, and
Thank you.
and so much I want to go to here. I was going to ask, how did this trauma materialize in your life? And so you said you were experiencing some physical issues with that. So when that happened, what did you wind up doing to be able to, as you say, kind of put your life back together? And how did you really decide that you needed to look inside rather than outside?
Great question. Great question. Well, there was this scene that runs through my mind over and over again, and it was at Christmas. And like I said, I put everything together in a really pristine way, and I was good at it. So I sort of remember that as sort of this Martha Stewart Christmas, if you will. Children were dressed a certain way, the house was all decorated, and I was cooking a soup or something over by the stove. And my beloved sister-in-law, big smile on my face, came over and she looked at me and she said, Sarah, why are you so unhappy? I'm so concerned about you.
Oh, wow.
And it was like somebody just cracked me open. And there was a tremendous amount of vulnerability, as we all would feel, right? If somebody had actually pointed this out to us without our asking them to.
Yeah.
But because there was such a level of trust there, it really woke me up. It was like, whoa, they can see this. People can see this.
Mm.
And so I put myself in therapy almost immediately. I found a cognitive behavioral therapist that I worked with for many years, and a trusted part of my healing team. And it guided me to, what I do now. My first thing, the first certification I got was in massage therapy, where I went and did a 2-year program that worked with cadavers. I mean, it was an in-depth program that really taught me the connection between the physical body, the emotional body, the mental body, and ultimately the spiritual body.
Mm.
So I think, if I could say anything to anybody, it's boy, trust your instincts. Boy, listen if you can. I know it's hard to listen when you're in tremendously vulnerable places, but if you can even listen to a whisper of that inner knowledge and allow it to take you down a path of learning, there's a lot there.
Mm. Yeah. You talked about, or when I was doing some research about the fact that trauma isn't necessarily a big event, or because there's like, is there a range of experiences, and maybe you can describe what what some of that would look like.
Sure, sure. The way that I've seen that is, as I hear psychologists and other researchers talk about capital T trauma or small t, or hard and soft trauma, or whatever you want to say there, I distinguish it by saying, hard trauma is, that event that life was this way for this moment, and the next moment it's a car crash, it's a, it's a rape, it's a murder, it's something that has completely changed your course of life.
Mm.
Whereas soft trauma, and I think it could be, not to take anybody's value from their experience, but soft trauma for me feels a wee bit more complicated, because it's more inbred in the culture of your life. Maybe it's, a chronically abusive parent, or whatever it might be. Like in my case, I say that one day it was this way, the next it was another way. That's not actually true. There was a lot leading up to that I didn't want to see. I
Mm.
just didn't want to see. It hurt too much to think that that could actually be the reality of my life. But and I think there's a lot in between too, but I think that's sort of a nice little way to frame things sometimes, where you think, gosh, what right do I have to this experience, or this feeling a certain way? One of the most interesting things I've heard lately is somebody say, trauma is not a fact finding process.
Mm.
And I like that. It's not a gathering of facts. Like, if you have an imprint, I truly believe, especially when you're dealing with siblings, like I'm one of 5, I would go to one of my sibs and say, do you remember this? Gosh, it hurt a lot. And they'd say, yeah, I don't really remember it that way, Sarah. And what I would take on from that is, oh, geez, maybe I'm making this up. And what I've come to really understand is that it doesn't matter. If it's imprinted you in a harmful way, it's worth your time and energy to try to unpack that.
Yeah, absolutely. And they very well did not remember it that way,
Right.
because it didn't affect them for whatever reason, and they were able to maybe just either ignore it, or maybe they were dealing with their own stuff that day, and so that it is amazing. And I think also just our brains are, uh, we take in different things and we choose to remember different circumstances. And of course, for you, it was that had that more of that negative charge. And from what I've read and studied about the brain, it's that we are hardwired to remember more of this negative things than we are the positive. And so since it didn't affect your sibling that way, it's natural for them to like, yeah, I don't remember.
Right.
Yeah, but
That's
as you
right.
say, it doesn't detract from how you feel, and you have to honor your feelings. It seems like, and just from my, I guess, living as long as I have now, and just being, talking to different people, meeting different people, that I think pretty much everybody has suffered some type of trauma in their life.
I
Um,
agree.
s- yeah. So what would you, well, actually, let me ask it this way. If you are starting to work with someone who comes to you, let's say that they feel that they've had some sort of trauma issue in their life, what are some of the first things that you do to help them?
I would say validation is one of them, right at the
Mm,
top of the list. My scope of practice is really clear. I'm not a therapist, so a lot of that initially is um, allowing them, offering to them, inviting them to seek out the discussion that they deserve
mm,
and get that kind of guidance. With that support of a therapist, I have this ability to do what I do well. I always start in the part of them that's screaming the loudest. So
mm,
I usually will break down, we'll talk about the physical body, we'll talk about the emotional body, we'll talk about the mental thoughts and racing minds. And those are some of the initial things that I will do with a client in the intake. But from there, I really start to unravel where we can begin. Um, you know, I know many people think that starting with meditation is the way to get them into consistent practice. I too believe that, but for somebody that's dealing with racing thoughts and self-deprecating feelings, that can be a really tough thing to start them with. So we determine some level of practice that they can get into and feel successful with, and also just sort of getting into the consistency, the discipline of consistency, um, that allows things to start to shift and to bring that view inside. you
mm.
know I often say, you know we leave for a reason. Energetically, we leave for a reason when we have experienced trauma, because it no longer feels safe to be here. So a lot of my initial work with them is, how do I call them back home?
Mm,
How do I help them come back home? How do we make this vessel a place that feels like home
mm.
again? Or maybe not again, maybe for
Yeah,
the first time ever.
yeah. Tell me a little bit, when you say that because you said your book is a guide to the resources within, what are some of those resources that we have?
Well, so it's a real blend. So the way I was guided internally to go, like I said, I started with a massage therapy certification, and I just really dove into that. It fascinated me. It connected me to my physical body, and that was the part of me that was screaming the loudest. My next goal was to become a Kundalini yoga instructor,
Mm,
and Kundalini yoga is just extraordinary in something called humanology. It has all facets of what it's like to be a human being, and it incorporates, glandular, lymphatic, all of this worked through pranayama and various exercises. And you and I were chatting a bit before our interview about the chakra system, and just all of this energetic,
mm,
all these energetic resources we have that we so often don't access.
mm,
from there, I went to divinity school. So I became an interfaith minister. And, you know, it's they're kind of all weaved into the book. But my thing, I think, in this first book is I am not here to teach you a spiritual direction. That is completely up to you. What I'm hoping to invite you to do is to create an infrastructure that feels, first and foremost, safe enough to return to, and also to trust. And how do we access this part of ourselves, the witness consciousness, the observer, whatever you want to call it, that part of us that really is sort of that objective part of us that looks and sees us and reminds us and informs us. And that's really what I'm trying to do, because my belief is if we can align the physical, the emotional, the mental, that the spiritual has this ability, the source energy has this ability to come in and really guide our life in just a beautiful, magical way.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. And as you were talking, it also occurred to me that can someone be affected by trauma and not realize it?
Oh,
And if
yeah.
so, how does that manifest?
Yeah, great question. The answer is absolutely. And I think many of us do that. I did it. I would never have told you I had trauma at
Mhm.
28 years old. I would never have said that. Um, I, I think it's very natural to be in denial of trauma. You know, what does it mean if I admitted that there was trauma in my life? What kind of shame would I have to adopt? Do I have a voice that could tell people about it in a constructive way? Do I have a believable voice? Will people believe me?
Mhm.
There's so many aspects to coming out with your truth that I absolutely believe that people don't come out with that reality because they're maybe just not strong enough to do so, and that's as simple as it is.
Mhm.
And the ways that we get these um I say downloads, or these
Mhm.
inspirations that tell us that we're not really on the right course, is,
Yeah.
for me, it was the physical, right? I My heart center, my lungs, my heart,
Mm.
everything was upper respiratory for me,
Yeah.
everything. And then, of course, the rashes, I got shingles when I was 28. The skin is our largest organ,
Yeah, yeah.
and I mean, it was just as though my body was angry. It was just like, wake
Mm.
up. But for others, it could be an emotional breakdown. It
Mhm.
could be, an insufferable mind that just won't, cruel, cruel thoughts and just won't let you go, failed relationships. Um, I mean, I think it can manifest in so many ways, don't you, Gloria?
Uh, Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that shame piece, I think, is a big part of it. And also the being unaware, because I can absolutely relate to that. When I started writing my book, and it turned out to be more of a memoir than I thought, but there was, as I was recalling incidents from my childhood, I realized that, well, yeah, my mom hit me once and gave me a black eye. So, wow. So I guess, I mean, in today's lingo, it's like, I'm child abuse. That was child abuse she was inflicting on me. You know, 55 years ago, it was just, parent would whack their kid maybe. But it was like, wow, I didn't really associate it in the way that we do today. So it is interesting. And I also have learned to say, I don't have to necessarily claim that label for myself either, of saying that, oh, I was a victim of child abuse. It happened, and I want to move forward from that. I don't want to stay there. Which do you find that some people maybe do stay affected because they do receive some value from it, and that's maybe why they don't necessarily, why they can maybe ignore those signals, perhaps, that their body, or even relationships are showing them that something needs to shift?
Yeah. Yeah, there are stages to grief, aren't there?
Mm,
There are stages, and there are stages to spiritual development. And was it Carolyn Meese that said, don't get stuck in woundology, where
mm,
you go out and you find your group of divorcees and all you talk about is divorce and how much you can't stand that partner and how you were betrayed. And I think I love the word validation because I think everybody deserves to be validated, but that's a step in the process. It's not the process. And and so if we can understand that that's going to bring us, it's just going to recycle the trauma, and you're going to do it as long as you don't want to do it.
mm,
um because like anything, it's a stuck place, and you will stay stuck as long as you need to be stuck, and then God willing, it'll guide you to the next step of healing.
mm.
But I think it's a very good point you brought up, that uh, we need to be reminding people, and I'm going to just do a little trauma recovery summit here because you're one of our fabulous speakers. Thank you so much for that. That there are so many ways that we get in and get out of these traumas. It may be a certain teacher for a certain amount of time, and then you graduate to the next, or whatever it might be, that we as guides, I should speak for myself. As a guide, I really feel strongly about empowering your intuition. This isn't about what I say. This isn't about what the next guy says. This is to empower you to make the next steps. And once you do that, you have a very clear path to learning that will last the rest of your life. Hopefully, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, that's such a great point. I love that. I'm going to change I'm going to change gears just for a moment here and just ask you, what are you curious about right
I am very curious about rest
now? Mm,
and the nervous system. That I have recently been to a workshop at Omega Institute in Rhinebeck, New York, and I did a yoga nidra workshop. And what yoga nidra is it's the yoga of sleep. They call it. Um, you're guided in meditation, and I'm very fascinated with this, what they call liminal space, this place between sleep and awake, where they say all your creative assets are there. All your unique brilliance is there. And I I see in myself, and I also see in the people that I serve, that there is always this great propensity to move faster and faster to get away from what disturbs us.
mhm,
And so when we have this settling, this quiet, and we can trust it and we can let ourselves go, um, that there's all sorts of magic that come out. I want to just say this because it fascinated me, so I'm hoping it'll fascinate you guys. um, that one of the things my teacher, her name's Tracy Stanley, said was that about this liminal space was that Ben Franklin and Albert Einstein used to sit in a chair, and they'd have a silver platter in their hand, and they'd have these silver balls on the platter,
mm,
and they would sit there, and as they started to drop off and sleep, naturally their hand would lower, and the silver balls would fall to the ground. It was at that moment that they'd pick up their pen or whatever it was, and they'd start creating
oh, I love
in
that.
in
Yeah.
that liminal space.
Ah,
Isn't that good?
that is so good. Yeah, because
Love that.
I wished I'd had that this morning because I was meditating and I had like this cool few lines, sort of a poem or something, and I I didn't want to break the meditation, but I really wished I had, because I was like, I was trying to tell my brain to remember this later. She could like write it down, but I didn't do it. But if I'd been holding that platter, I could have, it would have interrupted me, and then I would have. But
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
that's so cool. Um, is, is there a commonly held belief about trauma that you passionately disagree with? And if so, what is it?
Ooh, that I passionately disagree. I no, I mean, I've just interviewed 38 trauma specialists. You're one of them. And I've learned something from each and every one of you. So, no, but one thing that has always fascinated in sort of an easy way for me to relate to trauma, I was speaking to a physician friend of mine, and she was saying how um, she talks about sometimes trauma can be something we ingest, even, right? And she
Interesting.
says, this is how I identify trauma. She says, it's that which goes in and doesn't come out.
Come out. Oh yeah, I see that.
And that for me, it just the visual, it was like, wow, isn't that something? So
Yeah.
for those of you out there that are curious, like, well, I don't know if I've experienced trauma or not. Well, if it still ruminates in your mind and it still sends you spinning, or you find a trigger, give it some time,
Mm,
ask some questions of it, journal that. I think it's a really sort of a great little guide to what trauma can do to us.
yeah, yeah, definitely. You mentioned a couple different things that certainly that you have used to be able to help your own trauma work, and we've talked about meditation. Are there any other specific practical tools? And I do love journaling too. I think is so good, but other maybe practices or something that people can use to help them, if for whatever reason maybe they aren't able to even see a psychologist or counselor or somebody right now, that they could maybe at least get started on the path for themselves.
Well, I'm going to just say you really got to take this trauma recovery summit.
I agree.
The link is
Yeah.
traumarecoverysummit.com/Gloria. Um, there are people in this summit that are offering such extraordinary opportunities. They're healers, they're clinicians, they're all over. I would just off the top of my head, I would say, rest is a huge piece of trauma.
Mm,
And, trauma can interrupt the cycles, the sleeping and the awake cycles. And, rituals that feel like you could be successful in them. I
mm,
would suggest, even like if you took on a long, deep breath, like
mm,
how are you breathing? Where does that breath land in your body?
mm,
And can you, in the height of activation or heightened state, are you able to access your breath by inhaling and expanding that belly, and then exhaling and letting the belly move towards the spine? Just that can change your life. Just learning how to breathe properly can
yeah,
change your life.
that's true.
So we think it has to be so big, and really all it has to be is consistent.
Mm,
There has to be a desire to do it, to want it to feel better, and then just some consistency, something that you can do that will guide you just a little further down the path.
mm. I love that. And I think that's ultimately a really hopeful message, because I think that's sometimes when you are in the throes of whatever is going on, and you're feeling miserable or stuck or what have you, but to know that this too shall pass, and that there are things that you can do that are simple and low cost. Breathing is a really easy one to do, and but as you do say, there is a I'm not going to say correct way, but there's a better way. There's a more uh, beneficial way. That's the word I'm looking for. Yeah, that can really help you mentally, physically, the whole gamut. Yeah.
That's
So
right.
that's
I think it's important to say here, though, too, for those of you that are dealing with extraordinary circumstances, that we feel we are so alone in these times. And I understand it. I get it. And I think, the thing that can really happen here is if you can just take a full first step to speak to a trusted friend or somebody, somebody in your world. And if that's not possible, you know, go to a facility that is offering this kind of support and just take that first step, because even that first step will send you on a track of healing that you never imagined possible. um, you don't have to be alone in this.
Mm. That is 100% true. And yeah, I, we'll leave it. We'll leave it right there. I think that's awesome. Um, so if someone wants to, hello, bug. I'm trying to fly up my nose there for those of you who are listening and was like, wait, stop that. What I wanted to ask before I was rudely interrupted, was if someone wants to find out more about you also specifically, and I will definitely put a link to the Trauma Recovery Summit in the show notes. But if someone, wants to connect with you, what's the best way for people to do that?
Well, it's my name, sarahbrassard.com, pretty
Okay.
simply.
Mm.
That's my website, and pretty much all the information, including support or contact info, is there. I'd love to hear from you. We're very good at getting back to you. And I would just say that, it's important that you find trusted people. I now have an incredible network of people that I could suggest because of this trauma summit.
Yeah.
Um, and of course, Gloria, you're here too, to doing this, similar work. So we just urge you to reach out. Just don't be alone in this. There's just no need.
Yeah, that is for sure, because the support of people, it's so important. I mean, I can attest to that. I was, I guess, one of the one of the traumas, the more recent trauma in my life was losing my sister and
Ah,
to cancer. And praise God that I had invested in a mastermind group before that.
ah,
Uh, actually, while she was, or I think just before she was diagnosed. And that group, even though it was ostensibly to help with business, they really helped me personally. And it was so wonderful because I mean, I did go to brief support groups and things, but to know that I had these folks who had my back as I was struggling and confused about what to do about business because I was grieving and I just had totally lost my focus, and they were so supportive. So it can be, as you say, it could be reaching out to a good friend. It doesn't necessarily have to be, going to see a counselor, although I have done that too, and they are very helpful as well. So whatever you can do, um, and definitely check out the summit. I'm looking forward to seeing it as well, and learning from all of these other wonderful people that I know you have attracted to it, because I always want to learn and I always want to improve so that I can help my clients, which I'm sure is probably one of the reasons why you started this, I suspect. Actually, let me ask you that before we end up here. Why did you start this summit? Let me ask you that.
yeah. Well, unbeknownst to me, I guess I really wanted to learn more about trauma. And, that process has been just extraordinary. But, I love the name of the trauma summit. It's the Trauma Recovery Summit. While we are not going to heal anything in a summit like this, it was my wish that we could offer enough resources that you could then investigate one of these wonderful speakers and tease out something that's drawing you. There again is that word. You really want to tease out these whispers, these inspirations. We disregard them, and we especially disregard them when we're moving fast. So if you can spend any time sort of settling in and listening to what's screaming the loudest or what's whispering the loudest. It's worth it. The summit is October 6th through October 9th. It's a virtual event, just so everybody knows what we're speaking to here. And again, it's traumarecoverysummit.com/Gloria.
All right. Excellent. Well, I'm glad I thought to ask you that.
Yes, me too. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. So thank you so much for being with us today. It was so nice to turn the tables and get to interview you after you so graciously interviewed me. So thank you for
Thank
being
you,
here.
Gloria.
And I know that what you shared today is I'm confident it's going to help somebody out there today.
I hope
And
so.
yeah, thank you so much.
Thank
Uh,
you. Thank you.
And I do want to also thank all of you for your continued support and watching and listening to Live, Love, Engage. And I am just so delighted to be of service to you. And if you receive value from this today, I encourage you to share it with a friend. And of course, you can go to the show notes, and I'll have all of the links and that Sarah was sharing about. And I think that's probably going to do it for this edition. So until next time, as always, I encourage you to go out and live fully, love deeply, and engage authentically.